Dee Williams was 24 years old, and her life was a study in quiet desperation. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a decent but uninspiring part of Van Nuys, California, a place where the sun bleached the color out of everything, and the persistent hum of the 101 freeway was the neighborhood soundtrack. Her annual income, a precarious patchwork of earnings from a receptionist job at a sterile dental office, sporadic waitressing shifts, and the occasional sale of her handmade jewelry on Etsy, hovered stubbornly around $32,000 a year. It was a number that felt less like a salary and more like a cage, its bars made of student loan payments, rent, and the gnawing fear that this was it. This was the summit of her existence. Before the world knew her as Dee Williams, she was Deanna Wilson, a girl from a small, conservative town in Oregon where the rain was as constant as the gossip. Deanna had been a dreamer, a high school theater kid with a trunk full of playbills and a heart full of scenes from Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller. She'd moved to Los Angeles with a duffel bag and a burning conviction that her name would one day be in lights. But LA had a way of grinding down dreamers. The casting calls were brutal cattle markets. She was either too plain, too curvy, not the right type, or, in one particularly humiliating instance, told she lacked a believable inner life. After 2 years of relentless rejection, her savings evaporated, and the dream began to curdle into a quiet shame. Deanna was slowly fading, and in her place was Dee, a woman who had learned to keep her head down and her expectations lower. Her apartment was a shrine to a life not yet lived. A single, framed poster for A Streetcar Named Desire hung over her IKEA sofa, a painful reminder. Most of her evenings were spent there, scrolling through social media, watching former classmates get married, buy houses, and achieve a mundane stability that felt, from her vantage point, like staggering success. It was on one such night, deep in a rabbit hole of an actress she'd met at a callback years ago, that she stumbled upon it. The actress, a vibrant blonde named Chloe, was now a prominent name in the adult film industry. Dee wasn't prudish. She was aware of the industry's existence, but it existed in a distant, nebulous world far removed from her own. Out of a morbid curiosity, she clicked on a link. It wasn't the explicit content that shocked her, it was everything else. The production value was high, cinematic even. The lighting was soft and flattering. The sets were elaborate. And Chloe wasn't just a body, she was performing. She had a presence, a confidence that radiated from the screen. She was laughing, she was in control, and she looked happy. More than that, the comments section wasn't the cesspool of degradation Dee had imagined. It was filled with praise for her performance, her beauty, her authenticity. A seed, tiny and dangerous, was planted in Dee's mind. For weeks, she wrestled with it. The idea felt like a betrayal of everything young Deanna had believed in. But what had those beliefs gotten her? Debt and despair. She started researching with a clinical, desperate focus. She created anonymous accounts on industry forums. She learned about the major studios, the independent producers, the financial structures. A performer of Chloe's caliber, she discovered, could earn a mid-six-figure income. The number was so astronomically different from her own that it felt like a different language. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was a powerful lure. It was about agency. It was about taking a body that the mainstream industry had rejected and making it the star of its own story. The decision didn't come in a lightning bolt of clarity, but as a slow, inexorable tide. It happened one Tuesday after a particularly soul-crushing day at the dental office. Dr. Evans had berated her for a minor filing error, and she'd spent her lunch break in her car, crying over a stale sandwich. In that moment, the fear of the unknown was suddenly less terrifying than the certainty of her current misery. She spent the next month preparing with the focus of a method actor preparing for a role. She dyed her mousy brown hair to a rich, dark chocolate, a small act of reinvention. She started an intense regimen at the gym, not to change her body, but to claim it, to feel its strength. She practiced speaking in front of her mirror, lowering her naturally high-pitched voice to the warmer, more confident tone that would become her trademark. She was building Dee Williams, brick by psychological brick. Using a burner phone, she reached out to a well-regarded, female-owned studio known for its ethical practices and high-quality productions. Her hands trembled as she typed the email, posing as an experienced model from the East Coast looking to break into the LA scene. To her astonishment, she received a reply within hours. They were interested. They asked for photos. The photo shoot was her first trial by fire. It was held in a sleek, minimalist loft in West Hollywood. The photographer, a woman named Anya, was brisk and professional. "Think of it as a character shoot," Anya said, sensing her nerves. "You're not selling your soul, you're showcasing a product. And the product is a version of you." Standing there in a lace teddy, with hot lights on her skin, Dee felt a strange dissociation. It was as if she was watching Deanna from a great distance. But when she looked at the monitor after the first few shots, something shifted. The woman on the screen wasn't the defeated receptionist from Van Nuys. She was poised. She had a direct, challenging gaze. She was beautiful. For the first time in years, Deanna saw what others might see, and it was intoxicating. The photos led to a meeting with a producer, a sharp, elegant woman in her 50s named Isabel. Isabel didn't leer. She assessed Dee with the cool eye of an art dealer evaluating a new piece. "You have something," Isabel said, steepling her fingers. "A girl next door quality, but with fire in your eyes. It's a good combination. The industry is full of plastic. You look real. Are you ready for what that means? The scrutiny? The judgment from the outside world?" "I'm more ready for this than I am for another day at my day job," Dee replied, her voice steady, surprising herself. Isabel smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips. "Good. We have a scene in 2 weeks. A solo, to start. To see how you photograph on film, how you take direction. The pay is $2,000. $2,000. For a day's work." It was more than she made in a month at the dental office. Dee nodded, her throat tight. "I'll be there." The 2 weeks that followed were a blur of anxiety and grim determination. She gave her notice at the dental office, telling a stunned Dr. Evans she was pursuing a creative opportunity. She didn't elaborate. On the morning of the shoot, she woke before dawn. She dressed in simple, comfortable clothes, her script for the day, a basic outline of actions and cues, folded in her purse. The set was a beautifully appointed bedroom set, not unlike something from a high-end furniture catalog. The crew was small: a director, a camera operator, a sound person, and a makeup artist. The atmosphere was professional, almost boringly so. The director, a soft-spoken man named Mark, walked her through the blocking. "Just relax, Dee," he said. "Listen to my cues. We're building a performance, shot by shot. It's not about being explicit, it's about being expressive. Think of the camera as your scene partner." As the makeup artist applied the final touches, Dee looked at her reflection. Deanna was gone. In the chair sat Dee Williams. When the lights came on and Mark called action, a lifetime of performance instinct, buried under years of rejection, surged to the surface. It was terrifying and exhilarating. She was hyper-aware of every movement, every expression. But as she followed Mark's gentle directions, something unlocked. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by a profound sense of focus. This was a performance, and she was, finally, the star. The shoot lasted 6 hours. When Mark finally called, "That's a wrap," a strange silence descended. Dee dressed in a daze, her body humming with adrenaline and exhaustion. Isabel was waiting for her by the craft services table, holding an envelope. "You were a natural," Isabel said, handing her the cash. "Truly. We'll be in touch." Dee walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, the thick envelope feeling like a brick in her purse. She drove home, her mind replaying the day in a series of disjointed images. Back in her silent apartment, she poured the cash onto her coffee table. 20 crisp $100 bills. She sat on her floor and stared at it, the physical manifestation of her choice. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. A part of her expected to feel shame, to break down and cry. But all she felt was a tired, clean emptiness, and beneath it, the first faint flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time: power. The flicker of power Dee felt after her first shoot quickly ignited into a steady flame. Isabel was true to her word. The solo scene was a success, and within a month, Dee was booked for her first boy-girl scene. The transition was the most psychologically daunting step. It required a level of trust and professional detachment that pushed her boundaries. Her co-star, a veteran named Jake, was respectful and businesslike, and the director, Mark again, guided them through the scene with the patience of a choreographer. It was awkward, clinical in its planning, and yet, when the cameras rolled, Dee found she could access the same performative space. She wasn't having sex. Dee Williams was performing a scene of intimacy. The distinction was her lifeline. Her early performances were a hit. The Girl Next Door with Fire in Her Eyes, that Isabel had identified, resonated with audiences. Dee Williams began to gain a following. The money, which had once been a desperate fantasy, became a reality. Her $32,000 a year life was obliterated. In her first full year, she earned over $250,000. She moved out of the Van Nuys apartment into a bright, airy condo in Burbank with a view of the verdant hills. She paid off her student loans in one dizzying wire transfer. The feeling of logging into her bank account and seeing those numbers was a high more potent than any applause she'd ever imagined. But the external transformation was the easy part. The internal battle was a daily siege. She told her family in Oregon that she had landed a steady job as a content creator and model for a boutique media company. The lies were complex and exhausting, a spiderweb she had to constantly mend. Phone calls with her mother became minefields of half-truths and evasions. Her old friends from her theater days slowly drifted away, their lives on trajectories that no longer intersected with hers. The world of mainstream acting, the world she had once so desperately wanted to join, was now permanently closed to her. She was in exile, living in a gilded prison of her own making. Yet, within the industry, she was flourishing. She became known for her reliability, her creativity, and her surprising business acumen. She started her own website, controlling her image and revenue streams directly. She hired an accountant. She studied the market, learning which producers and directors were worth working with and which to avoid. She was no longer just a performer. She was a brand, a CEO of her own corporation, which happened to be herself. It was during this period of professional ascent that she met Lila, a fiery, red-haired performer who was the polar opposite of Dee's curated, accessible image. Lila was punk rock and politically outspoken, with a sleeve of tattoos and a razor-sharp wit. They were cast together in a scene for a studio known for its more artistic, female-centric projects. On set, their chemistry was electric, translating into a performance that felt less like a scripted scene and more like a genuine exploration. Off-set, they connected instantly. Lila saw through Dee's carefully constructed facade. "You're still playing the good girl even in this," she told Dee over drinks one night. "You think you've rebelled, but you're still following their rules. You're the acceptable face of the industry. When are you going to start making your own rules?" Lila's words were a catalyst. Dee had been so focused on survival and success within the established system that she hadn't considered she could change the system itself. Inspired, she and Lila began brainstorming. They envisioned a production company, run by and for performers, that focused on ethical practices, fair pay, and narrative-driven content that prioritized female pleasure. They spent months writing business plans, meeting with lawyers, and pitching their idea to a handful of trusted, powerful women in the industry. The result was Veritas Productions. Their first original series, a neo-noir thriller with explicit content woven into its plot, was a critical and commercial smash within the adult world. It proved that there was a hungry audience for material that treated its performers as artists and its audience as intelligent consumers. Dee was no longer just Dee Williams, the popular performer. She was Dee Williams, the producer, the auteur, the revolutionary. This newfound power, however, came with a heavier price. A conservative news website, tipped off by a disgruntled former associate of a rival studio, published an exposé. From small-town dreamer to porn baroness, the Deanna Wilson story. It featured her real name, childhood photos from her high school yearbook, and quotes from a distraught former neighbor lamenting the path she had chosen. The dam broke. The article went viral. Her inbox and social media were flooded with a torrent of hatred and judgment. But, to her surprise, they were also flooded with messages of support from fans, from other performers, and from women who thanked her for her bravery. The worst moment came when her mother called, her voice shattered. "Deanna, is it true?" The conversation that followed was the most painful of Dee's life, a tear-filled litany of disappointment, confusion, and grief. For 3 days, Dee didn't leave her condo. The walls she had built around her new life had been vaporized, and Deanna was exposed, raw and vulnerable. Lila stayed with her, a steady, defiant presence. "This is the cost," Lila said, holding her while she cried. "But it's also the moment you become free. You have nothing left to hide." Lila was right. The storm passed. The headlines faded, replaced by the next scandal. Dee Williams, the brand, had survived. More than that, it had been tempered in the fire. She had faced the worst the outside world could throw at her, and had not broken. She decided to lean into her authenticity. She agreed to an interview with a major, mainstream online magazine, not to defend herself, but to explain herself. She spoke eloquently about performance, about agency, about the economics of desire, and about the difference between the person, Deanna, and the persona Dee. She didn't apologize. She owned her narrative. The interview was a landmark. It humanized her and, by extension, her industry, to a segment of the population that had never considered its complexities. Offers began to trickle in from the mainstream, not for acting, but for consulting, for writing, for speaking engagements on topics of entrepreneurship and modern feminism. Now, at 28, Dee Williams lives in a modern, secluded house in the Hollywood Hills. Her annual income is a closely guarded secret, but it comfortably exceeds 7 figures. The money is now just a scorecard, a side effect of her real work. The girl from Oregon who dreamed of her name in lights never got her Broadway marquee. Instead, she built her own stage on her own terms. The journey had been born from desperation, forged in secrecy, and tested in public fire. She is no longer Deanna, the dreamer, and not just Dee, the performer. She is both, and she is more. She is an architect of her own destiny, and her story, with all its complexity and contradiction, is entirely, unapologetically her own. The performance of her life is no longer a performance. It is her life, and she is finally, completely, in the director's chair.